Kind of a topic to think as a platform, and wherein I'm sure the organizers are expecting certain kind of things to be sprinkled, and so once you sprinkle, obviously all that it requires the right kind of conditions to germinate and then to grow. And that's really, I certainly appreciate the effort put by organizers over here on this particular topic, because this topic is not something very confined. This topic is very broad. Many things can come under by the chemists, and chemists getting into technology aspect. Of course, many times in an institute of technology, I also come from one of those institutes, and many times people from outside tend to think chemistry is a service-oriented topic or science. But I think once they really know the contributions of the chemist, contributions in the form of chemistry outcome, I'm sure they will take back their statement of this is just a service-oriented kind of a thing. It's certainly not. For anything to develop, for example, technology, you have to have the concept, you have to have the molecular material, and then you have to have engineering ideas to transform and then convert into the technology. So therefore, I think as chemists, we should feel really proud to be at the beginning step of this entire hierarchical system. So I think if you remove the first step, but you can't have a second, you can't have a third, you can't have a fourth. So first step is the first step, and you require, and that's where the chemists play a pivotal role. And I'm sure, you should really feel proud that you're a chemist, because you can contribute. It's chemistry is nothing but creating molecules, creating materials, designing materials. So molecule to material. So therefore, there's a lot of challenges ahead for all of us, and it continues, of course. There's nothing like starting and ending. So it always, we keep going across the depth. So in that context, I really applaud the colleagues for bringing a platform of this kind of topic where many different kind of researchers can come and share their ideas on this platform to flourish. Okay, aspect number 2 is that today we think we have a lot of information. Let me first admit, I used to be there every Saturday, Sunday, completely in the library when I joined. Maybe I tell you, in the last 10 years, I have hardly gone to the library. The reason is we are getting things onto our desk and desktop. So today, the tendency of many of us, including our students, is that you ask something. Okay, there is some paper came in this particular mode, and the student will immediately say, "Sir, I have tracked down already. PDF is there in my on my desktop or on the hard disk. The PDF is there. But have we had a time to open, time to read, time to analyze, and think how I could use that in my research?" That is what is missing. That is where I guess conferences of this kind, meetings of various types, symposia, seminars, these all bring people onto a common platform. And on that platform, obviously, you don't say, "I have stored my PDF file," but rather you have to say what you know and what you think. And the people can discuss, debate, and come out with the plans and proposals as how to go about it. Understand what they're doing, interpret what they're doing, and plan what should be done for them. So I think that's where the platform of this kind of conference should be serving, and I'm sure it should serve. So coming to the platform of NIT's NIT system, as I know, is a vibrating system. It's of course transformed from the RDCs in the past, where more of a regional kind of inputs to a national level of consultation things that are doing, and I see that a lot of developments going on in this that's a great sign for any kind of a growth. And more than that, I feel today standing here, my age is at least minus 20 of my age right now, because I'm in the midst of all the youngsters. But I have not added much age to you, because you are 10 in number, I'm only 1. So you would only add to me to reduce my age, but I will not add to increase your age. So your age is perfectly standing at the same stage as where it is, and whereas my age has gone down. I feel really an young fellow in this, and I have a lot to learn, and I continue to learn. So this kind of a platform should serve to cater discussions, debates, ideas to flow, flourish, and take a shape. So with this, I wish that this conference take a great shape, and best of luck to all of us. Thank you. Activity in the protein structure. So therefore, probably one can use such kind of things, provided the PTA favors it for binding to the metal ion. Or there are certain regions of the protein where you already find a pre-formed binding pores. Or when you say ligand, you talk about one ligating system. But when you say coordination complex, you have several other ligating systems with respect to your metal. Something like a 4 coordination with a tetrahedral, 4 coordination with a square planar, 5 coordination with a trigonal bihedral, 6 coordination with a octahedral. So that means you need the ligands to be arranged in that particular form, so that a pre-formed binding force can also be existing in a protein system. Examine, I'll show you in a while some examples. Even sometimes when you add the metal ion, when the metal ion binds to the protein, can bring a change in the conformation. This change in the conformation would in turn lead to either to disrupt the course that formed, or to form a new course. So all these are the kinds of things that we would like to explore. So you can also take a metal ion containing protein, replace the metal ion, keep the metal ion, add a new one. All of these can be played with this, or combination of all this. So when you add a metal ion to the protein, it's not good to say that nothing happens to the protein's conformation. It does happen. In some cases, may not be so evidently sufficient enough, but in many cases there will be a lot more of the conformation change. So both of these are possible. So therefore, that is a kind of a boon in disguise. So you use a metal ion to interact the protein and cause a change in the protein conformation. Use such a kind of a system for material or molecular. So what I said, the course, if we look at the binding core, these two red with this one is carboxylate here, which is expanded over here. So there are some carboxylates here, carboxylates there. This is a kind of a core which is there. And like that we have some other kinds of core. This is the lactone where the calcium itself is binding. There is another region. So therefore you can find several unused side chain moieties which are capable of binding. So it's not only the kind of a protein which I showed you earlier, alpha helical. Even if you take the beta sheet kind of a protein, this is completely different as far as the structure of the molecule is concerned. And that thing is one molecule. So for an organic chemist, it is a huge molecule, obviously, and so for biochemists, it's a protein. So therefore, you can see that a region here, and where you have a carboxylate group and you have a imidazole moiety. It's a perfect kind of things which can add bind to the metal center. So these are we referred as a binding cores. Okay. So therefore, what one can do by metallating the system is you can generate a host of metallated proteins which can, if they can show some kind of a activity, then you can call them as an enzyme. So you can have an artificial metal enzymes. You can also have diverse nanostructures, because when you bind these ones, there is an induced conformational change. So therefore, the protein structure itself is changed. Protein-protein interactions will change. Therefore, you have a newer generation of inter-protein interactions, which are nothing but in the range of the nanostructure regions. You can use it as a functional materials for disease diagnosis, therapy, drug storage, release, gene delivery. We have examples of several of these. You can generate some devices also, enhancing the activity of the enzyme and protection against organisms. So variety of these things are all possible. Just to give whatever I talked in the last few minutes in the form of an example from the literature. As a perfect example here, a transferrin is a protein in our body which transfers the iron across the blood. Okay? And there are specific mutations for binding the iron. Now this is a whole huge protein, and then you have these two ions. Of course, there is a lot amount of transferrin is unmethylated also. So this is a perfect example for metallation in a sense. You can replace these ions by other ions. You can keep these ions intact and add other kinds of ions. There are, say, for example, cadmium doesn't replace but binds to this. You can remove the cadmium toxicity. You add titanium or indium, you can be replacing. Or you can add other kinds of species which would attach to this, and these ions can be either used for therapy, for carrying some drug, or as a radioactive. So therefore, this whole protein upon methylation can be used in various. This is detailed. I don't need to go aspect at all. Okay. Yeah. There is another example where methylating can lead to gel-like structures. Okay. So the methylation of the lactoglobulin with iron 2, copper 2, zinc 2, and in fact the kind of gels can be differentiated depending upon the concentration of the metal ion being added. At lower concentration you get a particulate kind of a gel, and a higher concentration you get a filamentous gel. These gels can in turn be used for certain applications, and this is another example of the methylation leading to some application into that. And the Alzheimer disease is basically characterized by the aggregation of the amyloid proteins. Amyloid proteins join together to form aggregates, and that itself is a characteristic for the disease of the Alzheimer. It is a neurodegenerative disorder. In this particular case, if you add metal ion, copper ions, it will prevent it will not allow that aggregation. So that means the protein-protein interactions are changed. So that is changed because these ions go into the histidine 6, 13 and 14 and make a kind of a curvature there to form a coordination with respect to this, and that brings a difference in the topology of the protein, its hydrophobic interactions with another protein. As a result of that, these protein aggregations broken down. That's kind of thing. So you can use for aggregating, you can use for deaggregation as well, the methylation. So the methylation can do a lot of these. And this is an example where a methylation increases the activity of the enzyme. Here this is an example where you take a copper, copper nitrate, which is dissolved in a phosphate buffer, you form a copper phosphate crystals. Copper phosphate crystals will come up. And in that, if you have enzyme taking the medium, the enzyme will coat on these particular copper phosphate crystals, and those enzymes show a greater activity than simple free enzyme in the solution. So these are several examples to explain you the methylation. So in presence of the zinc, in presence of copper, silver, the ionic strengths variation, cobalt. So variety of these things will show a lot different kinds of nanostructural changes as a result of metal ion induced conformational change in the protein, and that brings a newer kind of aggregation. Therefore, in our view, the methylation of proteins is basically to induce the new structures by changing the conformation of this, and these new structures will join together to form nanostructured species, which could be used for some applications, and that's what in our context means. So we have used a number of alpha helical and beta sheet, a few alpha helical and several beta sheet proteins for methylating these ones, and some of the list is given here. Some of these I'm going to cover, but most probably not all. But this is entire from R1. We've used lactalbumin, lactoglobulin, lysozyme, bovine serum albumin, wheat germ agglutinin. These are all from lectins. These are all beta sheet proteins, and these are all alpha type of proteins. So both
alpha helical proteins as well as beta sheet proteins. We have studied their metal ion interactions and their nanoparticle formations, etc. etc. So let's take example for from our own work. The photo-lactalbumin means with the calcium being present, FO-lactalbumin means calcium is absent. So you can remove the calcium by using some chelating agent quite easily, then make the FO. Now we use this for a variety of studies. One of the studies that I'm going to talk to you is about its interaction with the transition metal ion, also followed by lanthanide ions as well. Okay, I don't think we need to go through each one of these spectra, absorption spectra. These absorption spectra are measured as a function of addition of the concentration of the metal ion to the given protein. You take one protein and then keep adding metal ions. So you see that it looks like as if it is only one curve. It's not one curve. There are 10 curves which are almost overlaid on this. And you see that the 10 curves are a little different here, much more, and almost no change. So all that you can divide this particular result outcome is some of the ions are showing no effect on the absorption signals of this, and a few of ions are showing greater effect, and few of the ions are showing somewhat intermediate kind of thing. So the iron 3 greater than zinc, copper, etc. So, and in fact, we also try to look at, since these bind to the protein, they could also affect the protein intrinsic fluorescence. The intrinsic fluorescence of the protein comes from the tryptophan residues. When the tryptophan residue is exposed to solvent, it will get quenched, and when it is put buried into the protein, it will be enhanced. So that is the kind of the thing that we use. See again here, manganese, cobalt, nickel, they are showing no change in the spectrum, whereas other things. So we could get the evidence of interaction and binding both from the absorption as well as the emission spectroscopy. So is it just binding? Would it do any kind of a change in its conformation? So to study the conformation of any protein, what one uses is a CD spectroscopy. So this is the results of the CD spectroscopy done with all those ions. And here again you can see the cases where not much change here, not much change here, not much change here. There's a little marginal kind of change, but a greater changes in this. So the way that you see that has a kind of a collinear kind of a connectivity between what we saw from the absorption fluorescence. So the greater the strength of the binding, they seem to be the greater the change in the conformation. So it is basically the induced metal ion induced conformational change. So you could see the conformational change. Once the conformational change changes, then you have the aggregations also. So these are the kinds of things. Do they bind? Yes, they do bind. So you can show that this isothermal titration calorimetry will give you the isotherms which you can fit like these ones. They are definitely binding. Those like this, which you cannot fit, they are not like this. So therefore, you have a clear distinction among the half a dozen plus 7 or 8 ions that studied here. Some of them are showing the definite binding, and some of them are not showing so good binding. For example, here manganese, cobalt, nickel show no isotherm fitting, which means they are not binding kind of situation. So as I said, that when it binds, it changes the conformation. We are shown from the CD spectroscopy. Now, I also mentioned to you, as a result of the change in the conformation, their aggregation changes. So, in fact, simple protein would have a distinct particle kind of a structures, but here you find some kind of a fibrillar structure. This is transmission electron microscopy result, where you have structures of these fibril structures. And even if you use a copper 2+, you would see the bundles in the fibers in the network. So that is the protein adding. And at a different kind of a concentration, the higher equivalence of copper, you start seeing some kind of a tube-like structures. So that means inter-protein aggregations are clearly affected as a result of binding the metal ion to the protein, followed by the change in the conformation. And this is the result of that. On the other hand, we try to look at for the lanthanide ions. We studied 6 lanthanide ions here. You see in each of the case distinctly that all of them are changing the absorption spectral signatures. Unlike the transition case, earlier case when you studied 8 ions, about 3 of them showing no change at all, and 1 is showing very little, so almost 4 of them are not showing any change, 4 of them are showing change, whereas here all the 6 ions will make a difference. So that means all of them are binding to differential extent, and we have also confirmed this from the fluorescence spectroscopy, intrinsic fluorescence of the protein of this, and then accordingly we also looked at the secondary structural changes by CD spectroscopy. So unlike the transition metal case, the lanthanide ions do in fact interact with all of these. This is because if you go back to which I mentioned, we have taken the lactobamine and removed the calcium and called it as a apolactobamine. That means the original metal ion is missing. Now the lanthanides can go into that particular site and bind different of this, and yes, this is another indication for definite binding. See, all of them you can show that the isotones are well-fitted isotones. So these are the titrations of the protein of this. So therefore, all the metal ions bind, all the lanthanide ions bind, and this is conceivingly clear that these go and sink in the calcium position, and we'll see whether it's one ion or more ion. Then we tried the crystallization. The luck of my student who managed to get crystals of the apolactobamine lanthanum bound case. So lanthanum bound protein you have here, and this is a trigonal lattice. So therefore, you have 3 of the protein molecules coming together and the interprotein interactions of this. And if you look at the lanthanum center, see the lanthanum is bound by these carboxylate water kind of a structure, and some amides you as well. So this is the binding structure. And the original structure, the calcium is also known. Of course, the lanthanum you can see the kind of coordination of 5 and 3, totally 8 coordinations that you have. This is the apoprotein structure, is known. Calcium, which is the native protein structure, and calcium has got 7 coordination, and whereas the lanthanum has got 8 coordination. And the orientation of some of these groups do vary as you go from this. So that is where the metal ion induced coordination changes, and also it changes the conformations as well. And now if you try to fit the ITC data, you can find in case of lanthanum there is only 1 ion bound. In case of praseodymium 2, samarium 3, europium 2, gadolinium 3, and holmium 2. So you have a case where 1 ion, you have a case where there are 2 ions, you have a case where there are 3 ions. So out of all these, 1 ion always goes into the calcium center, and the other, second or third or both, they go outside. They bind outside. So if something binds outside, and they can, when you bring 2 of them, such proteins closer, you can start connecting them together. That's what you see. Yeah. Simple protein, you can see like individual droplet kind of thing. When you put lanthanum is only 1 ion goes into this. These are completely embedded the postdoctoral level and doctoral level, and we have done the crystal structure at in the IIT Bombay. We have